Welcome to the And She Looked Up Creative Hour podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and I'm an artist and an entrepreneur. And yes, those two things can go together. This podcast is for the artists, the creatives, and the makers who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of the podcast. I'm your host, Melissa, and I am here today with my September co-host, Ayngelina Brogan, from the culinary travel website Bacon is Magic. Hey, Ayngelina.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, we had a good time last week, so we thought we'd bring you back again. Today we're going to be talking about pivoting when you're faced with change in your business. And this seemed like a really timely topic given the situation in the world at the moment. But there's so many reasons why you might find yourself having to pivot within your business outside of a global pandemic. And some of those changes might be things that you've planned for, like it could be, the birth of a child or moving across the country, things like that. But most often, I think they tend to be changes that maybe we didn't plan for or didn't see coming. So like a global pandemic or losing your job or a change in your industry or perhaps a major health issue or even the death of somebody really close to you. There's so many reasons why you might suddenly find yourself faced with a big change and having to figure out what that means for your business. And I think there's even a third kind of change that I'm hoping we can touch on, and that is maybe you've just fallen out of love with what you do. And I think that happens more frequently than people like to admit. And I think that's especially hard if maybe your business is really successful and you're just not enjoying it anymore and you're thinking it's time to make a change. So we're going to be talking about all of that today. And I thought Ayngelina would be a really great person to talk with about this because if there are three industries that have been hit really hard by this pandemic, it would be travel, tourism, and the restaurant industry. And when you're a culinary travel writer, that's kind of your trifecta. So, I think Ayngelina is in a very different place today than she thought she would have been maybe back in January. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of the things that she has done to pivot her business, as well as things that you can do and prepare to do in case you do find yourself in a situation where you have to pivot. So let's dive into this. So, Ayngelina, I know that when January rolled around, you were not really seeing yourself where you are today. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about when you think back to the old times.
Absolutely.
Where did you see yourself being this year? And I mean that like quite literally, like where were you planning on traveling this year and what were you thinking of doing from a business standpoint, and where did you see this year sort of stretching out in front of you?
Well, you know what? It has been an interesting year because as I was planning in December for the coming year, I thought this would be my most profitable year ever. And I had set really aggressive traffic goals for my site and certainly income goals. And I really thought this was a year that everything was going to turn around. And I guess it did turn around, but not in the way that I had expected. And so certainly, being in your 40s and living with your mother in a small town in Nova Scotia is not where I thought I would be. However, I think in the end, it was actually where I have landed, despite making fun of my situation, has actually been really good. It's been, a really great moment of reflection. Also, having opportunities to perhaps address parts of my business that I hadn't had time for because the act of traveling is so time consuming and also mentally consuming. And in the end, I think while financially I may not be where I thought I would be, I think my business might actually be in a better place because of it at the end of this year.
That's really interesting. And that's actually a really good thing to hear. So You came home from Cuba, I think in March or early April.
I did. I came home from Cuba at the end of March, and you know, I had left Canada, and we knew about coronavirus, but at that time, people were just saying, more people die of the flu than coronavirus. So that's how long ago I left. And then I think we had 4 cases in Cuba, but they were very isolated. And I wasn't concerned. And so I thought I would stay in Cuba. But then when, our prime minister said we're going to close down the border, I thought, maybe it's a good time to go home just to check things out. And maybe I'll just go home and do some work until July. And then I'll come back to Cuba in July because I'm one of the crazy people who likes the Caribbean in the summer. But I did not foresee that, I will probably be spending the rest of the year home and rethinking, while I'm home, what am I going to do?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who really thought that kind of we'd be back to normal by fall, and that's just not going to happen. But when you came home, like any Canadians who came home at that time, you had to go into 14-day quarantine, which in your case was basically being confined to a bedroom for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And I know that was pretty challenging, but I'm thinking at the same time, it probably gave you some really enforced thinking time. Like you really didn't have anything to do except really think about like, what are my next steps?
Yes. And so, at the time that I came home, it was still in a moment where, I thought, okay, I'll be here, April, May, June. What do I want to do to make the best use of my time? And I quarantined in my room because I didn't want anyone in my family to get sick. I wasn't worried about my time in Cuba, but I had spent 10 hours in Toronto airport. And I thought, well, if someone has it there, then I'm definitely going to have it. And so anytime anyone coughed or, breathed too loudly, everybody else in the airport was just like taking one step away. So, my quarantine was an interesting one to be confined to a room. And I used it as an opportunity to plan the next 3 months of my business and looked at, what are things that I could be working on, in Canadian spring, which is really Canadian winter, and to make the best use of my time. So I wouldn't feel like that coming home wasn't being defeated, that I was actually using this to the best of my ability. And so, I worked on a lot of kind of the grunt work that people don't like to do. So for the first 2 weeks, I wrote a post a day and use that to schedule the next 3 months. So it was the next 3 months worth of content. So I had content ready to go, and then I could look at, what are the other things that I should be doing, but I'm not. And a lot of that, when you have a website, and I've had a website for 10 years, so I like to describe it as a messy closet. You get all of this stuff in it, and then you just keep pushing more things in it, and you just shut the door hoping it won't burst open. But really, it's a disaster. And so I looked at the next 3 months as an opportunity to kind of declutter, reorganize, build some shelves. And that's all a fancy way of saying, like, I did a lot of sludge work that needed to be done, but I could never get to it before. But now that, we were forced to be inside 24/7, it was the perfect opportunity to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. And as somebody who also owns a website that's almost as old as yours, I know exactly what you're talking about. It was kind of like a gift of time to be able to
Yes.
kind of step back and be like, all these things that I've been meaning to do for years, now's the time to do them. But in my case, I didn't have to worry so much about pivoting my content. Our site is very food focused, but not so much travel. So there was still a lot we could do. But you were in a situation pretty much immediately where nobody was looking for travel content. Like that just dried up. And you really had to think about like how you could pivot your content while still appealing to your audience. I think, you couldn't necessarily write so much about going places because nobody was going anywhere, but you still found a way to write about international food.
And that has always been part of my site as well. I consider kind of the two pillars as, the best food around the world, and the second to be how to make it at home. And the second pillar of how to make it at home, or the recipes, those were really on the back burner most of the time because it's difficult to travel and to write recipes and shoot them and do all of those things. And so I had enough food content. I was lucky. I had enough food content over 10 years that through Pinterest, I was able to pay my bills. And so I was very lucky. My mother said, come home, we'll figure things out. When she gave me that invitation, I don't think she knew I'd be here now, but she did welcome me home, and I just stayed. And so I was lucky in that I had enough food content, and I had diversified my content, that I had enough that I could pay the bills from there. And I think that's always the most important thing, is how are you going to pay the bills so you can clearly think about what your next steps are? Because if you're worried about money, it really consumes all of your mental and emotional capacity. And so I was fortunate in that I didn't have to do that. Now, I look at other travel bloggers. I mean, all of our sites, when you look at, our statistics, took a nosedive. Mine took a nosedive oddly enough, on March 19th, the day that I traveled back home. And so that was the day I think everyone decided we're not going anywhere. And so I was lucky that I did not fall as far as many people in the travel world. I know a lot of people who went from making, several $100s per day in advertising revenue to $3 at best. And so they were in a really bad place. And, I hadn't diversified my content because I was planning for something like this. However, I'm really happy that I had that second niche to be able to fall back upon. And so as I came out of quarantine and back into the house, I also got back into the kitchen. And so I had a short-term plan of what are great recipes that I can share to help fill out the content that I already have. So instead of chasing trends, I tried to look at, if we weren't in this time right now, what are the recipes that could work right now, but also recipes that I want to work for, in 2 years or 3 years or 10 years. And so not to chase kind of the easy things. Like, I did not bake bread. I didn't have a no sourdough bread on my site like everyone else. I think the world has enough recipes and videos and Instagram, posts about making bread. So I just really leaned into recipes that were from my family, were what we were making, and then also recipes that I had from traveling, but I just hadn't had a chance to share yet.
And I think probably at the end of the day, you've made your site that much stronger just by creating this new content. And because it is all complementary to your travel content. So it does work together. It wasn't like you came out of left field and started doing meal prep recipes.
No.
So it still speaks to that group of people who love to travel. I mean, obviously they're in a situation where they can't travel right now, but you've still given them a way to see the world in a way, virtually.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is that before I left, I had worked with a client, Wines of Spain. And so we worked on some content that was about hosting, wine, like a wine night at home. So having friends over and hosting the wine night, and, having food from Spain, and, making something festive to have friends come over and pairing it with different Spanish wine. And then we had held off on the content. I was going to post it in April, and then they thought, wow, what do we do now? Because we're certainly not having anyone over. And I said to them, we aren't having anyone over. However, the way we are entertaining ourselves at home and trying to make meals at home and making things at home, it still applies and is actually more important than ever. So let me rewrite the content, but the actual idea of having Spanish food and wine at home, still exists. And I really did see that a lot. A lot of people were trying to do different things. They were tackling recipes that perhaps were a little bit more difficult, or, having themed Mexican nights, or people were doing just whatever they could to make things feel a bit more fun at home. I mean, you can only binge Netflix for so long.
Yes.
And then people were saying, okay, so what's next? What are we going to do? And so I really looked at that. Like, if people are experimenting with their food, then this is a great opportunity not only to create new recipes, but also to dig up the old ones that I had already created and bring them forward to the site to say, hey, this is still a great recipe and so easy for you to make at home right now. And so it was an interesting time, and it continues to evolve. And, I still think in the back of my head, we may have to go back into that moment where we're entertaining ourselves at home again and we're not going outside. So, how do I plan for that type of content? And so I've really been leaning into the recipe side, and I've kept up the travel side a bit. I'm maintaining it. And I'm doing some other things I think we'll talk about a little bit later, but still just recognizing that any kind of international travel content that I write right now, it's probably not going to get any traction.
No, and I think that's one of the things that you have to kind of look at when you're thrust into a situation where your business isn't really working anymore, or it's not working as well as it used to. You have to come up with something new, and I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. It's like, okay, this isn't working, I don't know what to do. And you talked a little bit there about essentially paying attention to what people were doing. Like, where are they going? What are they doing? And how can I be there for them? And I think that's probably one of the first things you need to do when you're looking at pivoting your business, is looking at what are the cracks that I could fill for people.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look at TikTok. TikTok exploded. Everyone was on it. I don't think it would be as big as it is right now if people were not all at home, just staring at their phone, hoping for some kind of connection and entertainment with other people. And prior to, everyone quarantining and locking down, I think most people would say TikTok is for, the average age was 13. Well, that has certainly changed. My mother knows what TikTok is. And, the idea of this is very much a mass, and the type of content on TikTok changed. It wasn't just people singing or dancing, but people were creating food videos and sharing, makeup tutorials. And, all of a sudden that platform changed into very much a mainstream platform. And I don't think anyone would have ever guessed that. Now, I chose not to get on TikTok at the time, but, I know people who just decided, I'm going to see where this goes and experiment with it, because really, you've got nothing to lose. You have all the time in the world right now. And so they experimented, and they saw that evolve into probably a more stronger component of their business that they would have never expected.
Yes, I think that's something to be said. Like, I think a lot of I'm very pro self-entrepreneurship. You're very pro, being self-employed. But I think I think there's a certain romanticism that goes along with it. But what I don't think a lot of people realize when they get into being self-employed or having their own business is that you have to be really comfortable with change, because change is something that is a constant when you're self-employed. It is constantly, whether it's new platforms like TikTok, and before TikTok it was Snapchat, and before that it was Instagram, and before that it was Pinterest and Twitter, and it just in the course of 10 years, just the number of different platforms that have become available that we've all had to learn and figure out if they're for us or not for us, or what we could do on them. And there's so much technological change that goes along, especially in the digital content sphere where you are. And if you're not comfortable with dealing with change, you're really going to struggle as a business owner or as an entrepreneur. It's going to be really tough for you. So I think that in a way is sort of almost like the first character trait you have to have before you go into owning a small business.
I agree with you. And I think also you need to separate, like for me, I need to separate Ayngelina, the person, from Bacon is Magic. So the decisions that I make are for Bacon is Magic. Now, whether I want to do them or not as Ayngelina does not matter. So I have to really put my own personal preferences aside and say, okay, looking at this entity, what is the right thing to do? And it's not to be sitting on Instagram and scrolling all day, which would have been very easy for me to do. And it was, okay, so how am I going to rescue this business during this time? The one great thing was there was a gift of time. So while everything came crashing down and, I had my revenue streams were just, tanking, and there were no opportunities in some areas. There were opportunities in others. So I had to kind of put my emotions aside and think, okay, if you look at my bedroom wall now, I have 9 pieces of single sheet paper taped onto the wall with painter's tape. And as soon as I get an idea, they each have their own, they're like buckets. They're basically mental buckets. And so as soon as I have an idea that says, oh, like Nova Scotia has blueberries, you should pitch Nova Scotia Blueberries Association. I just write it on that wall on, under the pitch list. And so I just keep an ongoing of ideas of people that I pitch, people that, I've reached out to. And it's just this constant, okay, like this brainstorming of where can this go? And you have to be comfortable with understanding that, 24 out of 25 things are not going to stick. And then one might stick. It might stick short term and it might stick long term. And you just have to kind of get used to those numbers and knowing that I'm going to try something different. If you go in thinking, there's a good chance I'm going to fail, but I need to try it because maybe this will go somewhere, great. And I haven't thought about that before. And so, I have these 9 different buckets of just things that I've got all the time in the world. So, these are things that I think I should do, and hopefully I can get to all of them. I mean, I know whenever this ends, I will not have achieved all of the things that I want to, because when you have this time to think, just more ideas come. There's more potential. And so instead of having, 10 ideas and I just work at them for the next 6 months, these ideas just keep growing and evolving, and thinking, what else is there that I could do that I haven't tackled yet? And I think as a content creator, that list is ongoing. When people have a side hustle, they think, when I make this my full-time job, I'm just going to crush it. I'm going to have, all day to be able to work on, all of these things. But what they don't realize is when you have all day, then your list of things that you think you should be doing grows exponentially. And so it's this constant cycle of feeling like you're not achieving enough, you're not working long enough, you're not working hard enough, you should be doing more. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think now that we have all the time in the world that helps, but I think getting it down on paper and at least saying, if I could achieve everything, what would it be? And putting that into a list helps you think, if I do need to pivot or if I do need to change my business, what could those ideas be? And I've had scraps of paper for ideas of how to grow the business through other channels. And now is the time where I'm actually able to look at it and think, is this the right time to do that? Or, should I branch into other things?
Yeah, and I think that's something else as a small business owner is it's important to write all those ideas down. And the more you write them down and the more you think about them, the more they come. They always say creativity sort of begets creativity. But write those things down. I remember listening to Pat Flynn once saying that he actually has a physical shoebox where he puts all these random ideas that come into his head. He writes them down on a piece of paper, he puts them in the shoebox, and then he just puts the shoebox away until the next idea comes. And for him, that's his way of clearing his head, because he's so worried he's going to forget all these great ideas that he has. But if he physically writes it down, puts it in the shoebox, he's taken it out of his head, but he's put it somewhere safe, so that if he ever needs it, it's there. And he can go look, if anything happens and he has to pivot or he has to try something new, he's got this shoebox there that he can open up, and he can sift through all these ideas and be like, yeah, that's no good. That's no good. But, oh, this one's interesting. I should give this a try.
I think also the idea, although, I travel and I don't like to have paper, and anytime anyone tries to give me anything on paper, I say that I'm paperless. But the truth is that I am a real mind mapper, in that I like to have things written down. I like to have them somewhere where I can just look at them and visualize how things work out. And it's just different than me typing it out. I mean, I type all day, but it doesn't give me the same kind of brain connectivity to how does this all work together as when I write it out. So I agree. There's one, like, I love to write it out, and it's like, it's written down. I don't have to think about it until I want to go back and say, oh, what are all the things that I said I wanted to, like, improve on the website? What are all the technical things? What are all, all of these little things? So once they're written down, I don't have to think about them. And so that frees up space in my mind. But then also actually sitting back and looking at something and looking at a list that has been written really helps me in a different way than just looking at trying to get off the screen.
Yeah.
I find helps. And, that it's the same reason why I keep a physical journal and agenda versus a digital one. A digital one would accomplish the same thing, but there's just something about having something in my hand and being able to map out, when I'm going to do things, and, what the month will look like, or even what my day will look like. And I think that's just because, like, I love having a highlighter and being able to scratch off the things I did that day. But I just really get into kind of the paper part of it.
I'm the same. I have so many different notebooks lying all over the place, where I just like to have a notebook in every room where I can just jot an idea down. And I like my check boxes where I can check things off. But I like to go back through those old notebooks every now and then and just be like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was a good idea. I should do something with that. So I think that's important. It's almost like prepping to pivot, if that ever happens, that you do. Like, you've got these notebooks and shoe boxes of ideas that you can go back and take a look at. But I know, I'm really big on the word diversify. And that's actually my word for 2020, which is ironic. But I think another thing that's really important to know at all times is, within your business, is what your actual revenue streams are and what percentage of your business they take up. And I think this is something a lot of people kind of, I don't know if avoid is the right word, but maybe they're not as familiar with as they should be. Because I feel like, if you put it down on paper, and, like, let's say you run an Etsy shop and you make, I don't know, really cute little crocheted animals or something, and you make a couple $1,000s a month from your Etsy shop, and that's great. It's a good chunk of income. But then Christmas comes around and you make the other 50% of your annual revenue doing Christmas markets or holiday markets, those kinds of things. Maybe you do a holiday market in the spring, and then something like this happens this year, where all those holiday markets have disappeared. And suddenly you've lost half your revenue for the year. Yeah. Like, if you don't know that half your revenue is coming to you from this one specific income stream, if you lose that income stream, you're going to find yourself in a very difficult situation. But if you know that if I'm not being very eloquent about this, but if you know what percentage each of your revenue streams are and where that money comes from, you can take a look at it and you can ask yourself those questions. If I were to lose one of these, what would happen to my business? Would I be able to keep going? Would I have to tighten my belt? Would I need to introduce another revenue stream? Would I have to pivot completely? And I think a lot of people just don't know that. But one of the things that I like, I know you know where your money comes from. Like, you're very, you know, and I think we're going to talk about that in a future episode. But I think it's almost shocking sometimes to me how few people are really aware of where they actually make their money, and how many of them are so focused on one specific revenue stream. And I know in the digital content world, for a lot of people, that revenue stream is their ad revenue. And then when that ad revenue disappears, and while it did not disappear during this pandemic, it did drop significantly across all niches. So,
well, I would say in travel, it dropped completely for a lot of people. And so, they were left a lot. So I think I probably fared far better than everyone else because, while traffic for travel was decimated, traffic for food increased. And so I was able to reach a level that was sustaining, and I hadn't planned it that way. I was just lucky, but it certainly made me think, okay, how do I, what are the other things that might happen in the future that I could safeguard my site and what I create so that I don't have to worry about traffic dropping completely. But I also see that, to be honest, for a lot of Instagrammers, there are a lot of people making their entire income on Instagram, and it is frightening. It's terrifying for me because, Vine at one point was huge. And then all of those Vine stars, most of them disappeared when the platform disappeared. And then when I look at Instagram, there are some people who are smart enough that have developed other platforms where their brand exists. So it's not just on Instagram. And so they're at least diversifying. If Instagram closed tomorrow, or it goes the way of Facebook, where it's really hard to reach people, and it certainly is going that way, then at least I can reach the people who currently follow me. But it's the same for Etsy. Like, what if Etsy the next day, they just closed, or they were sold and things changed completely and you lost your store?
Yeah.
Do the people who buy from you, do they know how to reach you? Do you know how to reach them? And so it's, as you know, that one of the most important things to have is a mailing list, and that's so you can reach these people directly. So, if something happened and your platform disappeared or your store disappeared, anything that you don't own, then you would still have a way to reach people. And I think in the people within travel that I saw were still doing well, a lot of them had a solid email list. And so they were still able to reach out to the people that were their audience. And they also pivoted quite a bit in terms of how maybe there are things that how I can reach my audience directly, in the same way offer them things that I haven't before. And so I know this one travel blogger, Kate, she started up a book club, and she started doing Zoom calls, and she opened up a Patreon. And the reason she was able to do that was because she had, a very loyal email list that was essentially a captive audience at home. So as she was trying and experimenting with new things, they were willing to experiment with her.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really smart. And if she had just announced it on her site, I don't know if she would have been as successful, but she had an email list for so long, she was able to reach out to them directly and connect with them on Zoom when Zoom had become so popular at the time. Now, I think if you had asked Kate, 2 years ago, if she had thought about doing Zoom calls with a book club, she probably would have laughed. But yeah, she really tried to do a lot of different things, and I'm sure some of the things are working better for her than others, but it was really a time where she thought that, she needed to do something. And I think travel bloggers and content creators in travel as a whole are very accustomed to doing that, because most of us, many of us, don't have homes. Our income is on the road. And so we're always traveling and looking for different ways to make money to keep it going. When I started traveling 10 years ago, the only reason we were working with brands was just to extend travel. It was to travel as long as we could. Now, eventually you do burn out, but in a way it instilled a sensibility that you should always be kind of looking at what other people are doing and experimenting, because the old way of blogging where you just, put out a blog post and hope people see it. Maybe they see you on FeedBurner. I mean, that was only for 2 years, and those were the glory days because you didn't have to do a lot. You just told people what you did that day. And so now I just feel like if I had known 10 years ago what I would have to do now to run this business, I probably definitely would have not decided to do this full time. But, things change and evolve, and you just change and evolve along the way, and you don't realize until you really look back, doing podcasts like this where you just think, wow, it was so easy back then.
Yeah, well, I think that is part of being self-employed is you don't realize how much you are pivoting. Like, we make small pivots every single day and we don't even notice it because that's just part of running a business. It's like something changes a little bit and you bend to change with it, and then it changes a different direction and you bend again. And that's just part of being a small business owner. But you did bring up two really good points in there. One of them, which I am almost like evangelical about, is, be very careful about building your business on platforms that you don't own. And we have seen this over and over again. You and I have been in this industry for so long. We've seen things ebb and flow. We know that things disappear. We know that new things pop up and you have to start over again on another platform. And every time you build on real estate that you don't own, you're at the mercy of the landlord.
Yes.
Facebook got us all like so jazzed up about having our, pages for our business. Like, oh, it was a great way to be able to reach people. And then all of a sudden they started throttling back how many people saw your page. And slowly you entered into this pay to play system. And you'd invested so much time into building this huge following on Facebook, and then all of a sudden what do you do? Do you pay? Do you pay to get seen? Or do you just walk away from it?
I think a lot of businesses are pre-Facebook or post-Facebook. So anyone who was pre-Facebook and had their business saw how things could change so quickly. And so, we are active in Instagram and TikTok and all of these things. But at the same time, if I only have a certain amount of hours, I'm not putting it into Instagram or TikTok or any of these things. I'm putting it where, I own the real estate, which is my site and my email list. And so it was interesting. I had been, I've been following TikTok, and I just thought, I don't know where it's going. And certainly now, who knows what's going to happen in the US next. And Instagram just launched Reels to try to kill it like they killed Snapchat. And so it's always great to be one of the first on a platform. But also, I think it can't come at the expense of your business. And so you almost need to think, I'm going to spend 75% of my time on my core business and then maybe 25% experimenting in other places, but not more than that. Because if you go all in and you ignore the core of your business, then you could really get into like a hole that is difficult to get out of. And so, yes, I knew I could spend all day, at home for the last 3 months on TikTok making all of these videos. And I just thought, like, what am I going to do with this in the long run when I already know there are other parts of my business that I do need to work on. And then also, I have been saying for years that I wanted to get involved in video. And I thought, if I have to choose one, I'm going to choose longer form video instead of TikTok, because I feel at least it's applicable across various platforms. And video is the future. Now, whether it's in TikTok form or long content or, but I do know that it is actually something that is the right thing to do for my business. And so I had to say no to TikTok for now. I mean, maybe I'll do it in the future and I won't be a TikTok star, but that's okay. I mean, all of these social media platforms are really just supplements to my business. It's not my core business.
That's a good way to look at it, as a supplement. I think that's a really good way to it. Yeah, absolutely. Be on them. And even if, like you said, you chose not to be on TikTok, but you made sure you're aware of it, like you're watching it. And I think that's another important thing is, I think especially, you know, you don't want to be kind of like the old lady in the room, but sometimes it's like, oh my God, I can't deal with another social media platform. I'm not doing it. And you know what? That's great if you are, you know, if you don't own a small business. But when you own a small business, you have to at least be aware of what's happening around you. Even if you choose not to participate, you need to know that it's there, and you need to know who's using it, and you need to know what they're doing on it. And then you can make an informed choice. But yeah, I think the 75-25 ratio is a good ratio to embrace when it comes to those things. I'm just thinking about when Snapchat almost disappeared because Instagram started stories, right? How many people had to just kind of rejig and move over to Instagram? And
well, that's it. And Instagram Reels launched a few days ago.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I've got some videos that I've already shot. So, you know, I will do one a day. And I'll spend 5 minutes that day just putting it up, seeing how it works. But again, I'm not going to invest all my time in Instagram, because Instagram has already showed us that the only way you can get reach, unless you're one of its featured content creators, which is not me, is to pay. And so again, I'm not spending all my time building Instagram's watch time on their platform. I want to, you know, build my own business. Yeah. And so, you know, I'm there and I'm putting things up and I'm seeing how things work. But, you know, my future as an Instagram star is not going to happen. And I'm okay with that. And the same thing for TikTok. I thought a lot of people discounted it and said, oh, you know, it's just dancing. And I knew it wasn't. I knew there was potential there, but I just thought there's potential there. But I'm also not at the point in my business right now where I can be taking that time and investing it elsewhere. Because right now, you know, I say 75%, 25%, but really I feel like it's like 100% and then trying to do a 25% on top of that. Yeah. So there's definitely, you can do too much. And so you just have to decide what makes the most sense. And so actually this week, or the past, I guess mid-July, I finally invested in video. And it is a major pivot for me because while I've done video in the past, I haven't actually spent the time to consider how I would do it consistently, how I would edit it. In the past, I had an editor, but that didn't make sense financially in this current situation. And that's a major one for me. And I feel like that is enough right now to experiment with. So I will put up the Instagram Reels because I already have that content, but I'm not going to spend 8 hours a day finding out, you know, how to succeed on this portion of Instagram.
Yeah. And what you just referenced there was sort of the other thing I had written down when you're pivoting, is to look at your skill set, and look at the things, like in the instance of your friend Kate, who started the book club, like look at other things that you have or that you can do that you can offer. And in your case, you're actually going out and you're learning a new skill. So there's two different ways you can look at it. You can look at the skills you already have and think about ways that you can parlay those into a new revenue stream, whether that's, I don't know, writing an ebook or creating a video course or teaching people how to knit via Zoom, or, you know, things like that, or things that maybe you did in person at one point. Now, how is there a way that I can do them digitally? And then in your case, you're actually taking this time and you're going out and you're actually learning a new skill that you think could be very valuable to you. Actually, you know, is going to be very valuable to you in the immediate and not so immediate future. So that's another big part of pivoting, right? Is you have to figure out, sometimes you have to learn new things.
I think all of pivoting is learning new things for the most part. I mean, you may have a skill that's transferable, knitting, but you then have to learn how to use Zoom.
Yes.
What's great audio? What kind of lighting do I need? And throughout the years, I've identified different things. For example, I primarily write, food guides for people traveling to different countries or cities. And it includes background, historical, and cultural context to the food so that when people get there, they know, the most common traditional foods that they should be looking out for, or fruits that they may see in a market. And then also some restaurants, some are, the high-end touristy, and some are, my favorite food carts in different places. And so the bulk of my business is, creating these posts that people find on my website. And then, 5 years ago, I realized I was getting a lot of emails asking me, what was the hotel that I stayed at? How do I get from the airport, to the restaurant? Do they have Uber? All of these technical things, that the details that people don't care about in a blog post, but still my readers wanted. And so I thought, I'm going to take this content and supplement it with all of the travel details that I think are too boring for a blog post, and turn them into downloadable PDFs. And so to do that, I needed to learn how to use InDesign and, lots of YouTube tutorials. I mean, you can learn anything on YouTube now.
I know, it's great.
and that was something that I did because I knew my readers needed it. And also it really, I didn't have to answer those emails anymore because I had downloaded for it. And then also was something that I turned into a revenue stream because people I could sell it to destinations as a part of a package, but then also I was able to work with some food brands to extend from travel guides to, one year I created a Canada Day entertaining guide that had, the shopping list, the prep list, like what you do every day, and then a series of recipes that if you were having people over. And so I was able to work with different food brands to create that. And the great thing about that was it was content that I was already going to create. And then I was able to approach, those sponsors to say, I'm creating this. Would you like to be a sponsor? Look at one of the guides I've done in the travel sphere, and it will look like that, but it's going to be something that will live on people's iPads and computers, and you will be attached to that, forever. And so that was something that came out of needing to, I pitched it. And I mean, at that time I was pretty good at InDesign, but the lovely thing is, you can go on creativemarket.com and download a magazine template, put it into InDesign, and then just, if you've got enough time, you can figure out how to revise it to get it to a place that you want. And I think when you want to pivot, you need to be prepared that you're going to have to do some things that you don't know how to do. You're going to be on YouTube for a long time trying to figure it out. And your first go at it is not going to be great, but it will continue to get better.
Yeah, and we talked about this last week as you were going through your video learning curve. And just, I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but I loved the way you said it, is that you had to get used to not being good at something again. Like,
yes,
that's not exactly how you worded it, but the implication was that you had to be okay with going back to being a beginner. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to give yourself permission. And this is hard. I mean, especially I think for a business owner, you get to a certain part of your business and, it all kind of ticks along. And especially if your business is doing well, you think, oh, I'm great. I don't need to diversify. I'm just going to keep doing the things that I need to do. And so with video, I don't have the skills to create what the vision I have in my head. And I don't have the experience to know how to shoot all of the components and how I should be on camera. There's so many elements that go into a video, and it was really frustrating because I want it to look like someone who's been creating videos for 10 years, not someone who's been creating videos for 2 weeks. So we all have egos. And so I just thought, what is that phrase? It's better to be finished than perfect, or
Better, yeah, better finished than done, or better done than perfect. That's, I think, what it
better
is.
done than perfect. And so on Saturday, I finally hit publish on my first video, and it
Yay.
wasn't polished, and there were lighting problems, there were problems all throughout that I could see. I would have loved better transitions, and I would have loved if I were better on camera. Just so many things I would have loved to do. And I am so overwhelmed by all of this because I posted it on Facebook, and 35,000 people have viewed it in 24 hours. And so I'm so blown away. I mean, I'm not expecting this to happen with all of my video because I know it's not, but what validated it wasn't that people said, "Oh, this is perfect, it looks beautiful," but they really resonated with the places that I went, the things that I had to say about it. And a lot of it, it was local people sharing it. And so it's a town, Yarmouth, that doesn't get a lot of love, and a lot of people don't go there. And so locals really supported it. And I received so many just really nice messages from people, just really appreciating it and thought it was fantastic. And I just thought, I have been agonizing over this for so long, and I'm glad that I just hit publish. There's always more to fix. And so that really, in the last 12 hours, solidified for me, in the beginning, it's going to look like beginner video. And so the only thing you can control is, what you share, what you have to say, and the emotion and affection you give for a place. And for some people, that will be enough. Now, I know for my other friends who create video, they saw all of the mistakes, but they've also been doing it for a lot longer than me. And so it was just this moment where I just thought, why haven't I been doing this? Or why did I wait so long to do this?
How many of us have said that? So if this is resonating with you and you haven't listened to it before, I strongly recommend you go back and listen to episode 3 of the podcast, which is on procrastination and perfectionism, because we did a whole episode on exactly this topic. And it's we all do this. Like, I remember when I had people telling me for over a year to start an Etsy shop because they wanted to buy my illustrations and prints and things like that. And I agonized over it because I had to learn how to digitize my art. And I just didn't want to do that. It sounded so hard. And I just was like, no, I don't want to do that. And then I had to figure out what kind of paper to print things on, and I had to figure out how to do shipping. I had to figure out all these things that were new to me, and I had no idea that there was that many kinds of paper out there, for one thing. It felt overwhelming, but at the same time, most people, they don't even notice those things. They're just excited to see what you're putting out there because they love your stuff, or they connect with you emotionally, or something about what you do resonates with them. And they don't see all the mistakes that we see. They don't see that line is a little too thin, or that maybe that edit wasn't quite as crisp as you wanted it to be, or you didn't have really cool B-roll or whatever. They don't notice that. You only notice it because that was the vision you had in your head. So I think there's a lot to be said for just do it. The only way you're going to get better is if you keep doing it. That's just how it is.
I have 8 more videos to edit this month. And I was telling one of my friends who was giving me some advice on just, things I'd done wrong. And he said to me, we were talking about how I had really overcommitted to doing 8 more videos. And he said, well, when you're done, you're going to be a better editor and your videos will look better. So there's the bright side to that. And I thought, yeah, there is always a bright side. But I think when you were talking about Pat Flynn's shoebox, I think there should be a shoebox of ideas of when people say you should do, and then just whatever it is, because I think we're always very quick to pass it off because either we don't think we're good enough, we don't have enough time, it's not a good idea, or we think they don't understand our business. But instead, we should just take those ideas, write them down, and put them somewhere, because we may get to the point where that idea makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you hear that enough, then it's really telling you, if you're opening that shoebox and, 10 people have told you that you should have an Etsy shop, well, then maybe you'll realize you should have an Etsy shop.
Yeah. And I would never have opened an Etsy shop if I hadn't been told over and over and over again that you should open an Etsy shop, until finally I was just like, maybe I should open an Etsy shop. But honestly, if just one person had said that, I never would have done it. And maybe even if only 5 people had said it, I wouldn't have done it. But enough people said it that eventually it seeped into my subconscious. And I did it. But I think that's a really good point. Every time somebody tells you to do something, make a note of it and keep a tally, keep a score. And maybe one day you should try it. And I bet you that video number 8, when you look at it, is probably going to be miles better than video number 1. But, you wouldn't have got there if you hadn't done video number 1.
Yes. And they have that, I think in photography, they say that you need to take 10,000 photos before you even become a beginner or something like that. And someone had told me that I don't know if it's karate or one of the other martial arts, you need 10,000 hours in order to, be considered a beginner as well. And so it's just one of those things you have to start, and you have to be comfortable with knowing that it's going to be bad. and when I look at my video, I'm actually quite proud, because I thought, when people started saying, giving me feedback, I thought, actually now I realize that there is some value there, that, I was genuine and sincere, and people really received that. But I know that, yes, after the 9th one this month, that I will look at the first one and think, oh, you made so many mistakes. But that's in everything that you do. Yep. I mean, anything that you do well, hopefully you look back and think, wow, I was really bad in the beginning. Because if you're still at the same level and you have not advanced, then you're in trouble, and maybe you should pivot again.
Yes. Time to pivot.
Yes. But part of the reason why I was comfortable with getting into video is that it's not the core of my business. Again, it's an aside to it that I think complements it, but I still have the core of my business that I'm working on. So this month it is taking up all of my time because I overcommitted to making 9 videos, but in the future it will be, the 25% of my time, and the rest of it will be on my business. Or maybe it'll be the 20% and I'll spend another 5% somewhere else. But you kind of have to, I guess, figure out and negotiate where you can remove some time from your business on either the core work or maybe some things that are just not working for you. I know that when I got into Pinterest, I decided not to participate really in Twitter anymore. I just said, okay, if I spend, say, 2 hours a day on Twitter, I'm now going to move that to Pinterest. And I just let Pinterest or Twitter slide, because it just wasn't something that was paying me back. And so you have to decide, maybe there are things you're doing that you're wasting time, or maybe not delivering as much time, as maybe not delivering as much value as you think something else could be. And it's just going to take an investment in time to get there to see.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to know what's going on in your business, and to know where things like traffic and sales and revenue come from, so that when you do notice those things starting to drop, like if you suddenly notice that you're not getting the same level of engagement on a certain platform, and you investigate a little more and you don't think you're going to get any further engagement, maybe it's time to take the time away from that and move it to something else, like something like Pinterest, where you can see a definitive result from it. You can see an increase in traffic because you've put your time and energy into it. So I think it's important to kind of to measure all those things and be able to say, like, you know what, like you said, this just isn't really moving my business forward anymore. Maybe it's time to try something else.
And look at one of the things that I don't think enough people do. One, they don't spend time learning how to analyze their analytics or their revenue or, all of these things. That we don't want to deal with numbers because, numbers are complicated and it takes time to, go through them to analyze what is doing well. But one of the great things about doing that is not only do you see what is not doing well and maybe you need to abandon, but you see what is doing well and maybe you need to create more of it. And so if you have, 80% of your business coming from one area or one topic, when we talk about pivoting, it's also maybe there are adjunct products or ideas or media that could come out of that. And so instead of trying to do everything on every topic, every media, it's better to kind of find out why people are coming to you and give them more of that and give it to them in different ways.
Yes. So instead of pivoting, maybe it's almost more of leaning into something that is doing really well and that you can see growth potential, which is a form of pivoting in its own way. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, so we're coming up on the hour, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to a few different things. It comes down to, first of all, knowing your business well. You do have to be able to measure things in order to be able to know where you're at before you can go anywhere. So I think there's that, but I think you also have to be very aware of where your business is, what kind of platforms you're on, who you're reaching, what would happen if any of those platforms were to disappear or to be severely pulled back, what you own, what somebody else owns, and then looking at the types of products and services that you actually offer and seeing if there's things that don't do well that you should pull, or maybe there is something that you could branch out into and make even bigger, or maybe you could add a new price point onto something. There's so many different ways that you can tweak your business, and it doesn't have to be a major pivot. Like I was saying earlier, I think sometimes being a small business owner just means you pivot every day. Like it's just a constant sort of like a tree bending in the wind, So I think there's so many different things you need to look at, and pivot doesn't have to be a big scary thing, but the more aware you are, the more you embrace learning, the more you are prepared for change. When change does happen, it's not going to be so dramatic. I mean, sometimes there are going to be dramatic changes. Nobody could foresee a global pandemic. But I guess, if there's one good thing that came out of it being a global pandemic is that everyone's in the same boat. Like, it's affected everyone in some significant way. So in that sense, we're all kind of trying to figure out a new normal. But at the end of the day, you have to figure out how to move with change, because change is the one constant that we all have to deal with. Did you have anything else that you wanted to throw in there, or do you think we covered it all?
I think we covered it all. Although I will say one thing, if people don't know how to pivot or what they should do, I think it's a really great idea, maybe just to get together, and it can be on Zoom, with 3 or 4 of your friends who also might have small businesses, or maybe they don't. I mean, they could just be people that know you and know what you do, and just brainstorm, like, what are all of the, I like to say to people, give me all the bad ideas. And so everyone throws out, they're not afraid to throw out any kind of idea of what you should do, but just brainstorm the bad ideas and maybe get to some good ones too, of what are different things that you could do or think about. And people love giving their opinion. And if you have a group of creatives, then, you can do it for each other, and don't turn down any of the ideas, as people are giving them. Just make note of them, write them down, and then, come back to them when you're ready.
Yeah, and I'm very guilty of this. People giving me ideas and just kind of dismissing them out of hand and saying, "Oh, that won't work because of ABC," when really I should just shut up and take the idea and just put it again in that box and let it percolate in my brain. Because very often those ideas that I did dismiss out of hand, I wind up coming back to and realizing that, you know what, maybe the exact way that they told me I should do this isn't quite right for me, but there's a nugget there. There is something there that I can turn into something. And I wouldn't have gotten that if they hadn't given me that suggestion. So, sometimes when people are giving you these ideas, just hush up and write them down and make note. But I think that's a great idea. And I actually think your idea of even doing this with friends is a great idea, because your friends see your business from a very different perspective than you see it. They tend to probably see it as a customer, and they might be able to give you suggestions that you would never have even thought of, because they're coming at it from a completely different viewpoint. They're not necessarily thinking about profit and margins and traffic and things like that. They're just thinking, hey, you know what? I would love it if somebody did this. Like, that would be really cool. I'd be into it. And so, don't be afraid to have those conversations and take those ideas that they give you again and write them down and think about them. See if there's a little nugget or a kernel of something in there that you can do something with. Well, I think that's it for this week. So this was great. Good conversation. And we're going to be back next week. And I think next week we're going to be talking about... We haven't actually discussed this. I'm actually telling Angelina what we're talking about next week. We have discussed it, but I didn't say it was next week. We're going to be talking about the difference between calling yourself a publisher and a blogger. And this is actually the first conversation I ever had with Angelina years ago when we first met. And it struck me so much and completely changed my outlook on being a digital content creator. And I'm actually really excited to have that conversation, because I think that will be a light bulb moment for a lot of people out there.
You know what? I think it's also, although we are talking about blogging, I think it's also good for I am an artist versus I am a business.
Yes, I think you're right. I think we tend to get too caught up in labels and don't necessarily see the bigger picture. So I'm excited for that conversation next week, and that's when I will see all of you again. So until next week, I hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshelookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshelookedup.com, or come say hi on Instagram at andshelookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.